Hello, this is Jeff Segor again. This is video number 9 in our Programmer's Journal on how to create a website and web server using a database and creating a recipe manager application. So in this video, it's going to be a lot of material. What I've done is I've added a whole bunch of new components and the source code so that we can actually import the data, basic recipes into the system for the first time and then retrieve the data. So we're also going to be doing some debugging, and we can debug in at least 3 different ways. We can debug through the TypeScript Angular code. We can use the Chrome debugger to step through the code from the front end side, and we can use Visual Studio to actually step through the Node.js backend code as well, which is very handy because that's the hardest part of the code, in my opinion. So let's see what's on the agenda here. So what I did was I added these new components using these commands here. Generate, this is Angular, generate a component called accessories. That will list basically all my kitchen items and brand names and stuff. I've got an error page in case we get an error when we're trying to talk to the database. I thought that would be handy to see that. In stock is essentially what I've got in my inventory, and things are checked if I've got it. So this will be used in conjunction creating a shopping list, intelligent shopping list. Recipe holder will display a given recipe, the ingredients and the instructions. The shopping list itself will allow me to create a shopping list using drag and drop, and also if I decide to pick, say, I want to shop for a menu item, a recipe, it can help me with cross-checking that with the inventory. And then I created all these are components here, created this service, and the service is generated by using S instead of C. And you can think of a service as sort of a place for sort of global calls that can be made from all of these, just common functions. Now, when I created that, this is the Git Gui. These are all the changed pieces of code that I've added some images as well from my original application. And anytime you see a blank icon like this, it means that it's a new file. So I've got a lot of new files in here. So something to point out as far as Visual Studio Debugger, there are some gotchas that if you don't know about them can be very annoying. But we can essentially step through Angular TypeScript code. And when we do that, when we're debugging, we've got 2 output windows. If you remember, we've got a terminal window and a debug console. So the output that's coming when we run in this mode using the launch Chrome, any output from the server is going to go to the terminal window. Any output from Angular itself, the front end code, is going to go to the debug console. And that's the same logs and information that you would if you were debugging within Chrome. However, if you launch Node.js using this launch program, then you can't step through the Angular code, but you can step through the Node.js code, and its output is going to go to the debug console. Okay. So this is one of the ways we're going to create a new launcher when we want to step through the back end code. And by default, it's going to have these pieces missing. And if you don't put these in there, then the debugging will not work. So this particular call here, workspace, is default folder of my project. So that would be the Jeff _ recipes _ tutorial. But the actual Angular program is in this directory. And then when I'm launching, we're going to be launching server directly when we use this method. Couple other items. There's a thing called Unbound Breakpoints. And when you first try to debug, you'll see this, and it's very annoying. So I'll show it to you. There are two things you need to do to fix that. One is in the Angular.json file, there's a thing called default configuration. You got to switch that to development, and that will ensure that the source map is set to true, which allows you to step through the code. Also, you have to make sure that this is set correctly, otherwise this will not work. Okay. And yeah, I'm sorry. Correction on that last point. Since we're debugging, in this particular debugging, we're debugging in Chrome, you got to make sure that we add the recipes. So by default, it just puts this workspace folder. You have to put that in. So I'll show you what actually happens. So let's switch back. So let's get back to our code. So I've added, if we look in under recipes, look under the source, I created all of these new components. And remember, the component has three parts. It's got the code itself, HTML part. These each represent, these will actually represent pages. So this will be a special page. And they're all directed using the router. So if you look at the router, we've added new routes. So in the very beginning, we added the landing, but now we've added recipes, shopping list. And you have to associate that with the component. So we have to put these in manually. Got the error page, we've got all these, and we've got to add the importers here. So let's say we are on our landing page, the very first line of code that should be executed if we go into our debugger is going to be in this on init. So if we set a breakpoint here, this is how you set breakpoints on a particular line. Now, if I launch this, you would expect, oh, this be the first thing I hit. So in order to launch this, remember to do this is we go to here and we say launch Chrome. Now, before we can launch Chrome, we've got to set up a program. So we're going to do Node.js. This is the back end. So now I'll launch this. It launches it, and now what you've seen here is in our last video we'd set up this navigational thing. These are now operational. But if we look here, this breakpoint is now unbound. Well, what's going on there? Well, two things you have to do. as I had mentioned before. First thing is to go to Angular JSON, look for this default configuration, which is under development here. By default, it's set to production. We want to set to development because if it does development, it's going to set this attribute here, which is a source map, which is required to do debugging. So we need that. And if we go to our launcher, configuration, notice we don't have slash for a launch Chrome. We don't have the slash recipes because I created this at a higher level than the Angular folder. I need to put this in. Do a Control C, get out, do a build. Stop the debugging here. Very noisy laptop right now, and the fan is going full blast. Okay. Do an up arrow, kick off the server. Now we should still have our breakpoint set. Voila. Now we hit our breakpoint. And this is the way this works. This is basically continue from where you are until it hits the next breakpoint. This will skip over. We can set, okay, so what we're doing here, this is some new code. I'm using the service data access, and you can step into that function. So I'm using fetch data, and I'm giving it a URL for, this is my REST API command to be able to get all the recipes so I can plaster them on the page. So let me step into that. So now we're in data access service. And what you do is I'm using a thing called TTP client. In order to set up your TTP client, you have to import it from here and also require some headers. But you also have to define it within the module itself manually. So if we go to the module, we have to load in this HTTP client module. And you also have to declare it as an import here. So we're at this breakpoint. This is the URL that we've sent in. And remember, it's kind of relative. This will be attached to the full URL address. Now what this does is this will return an observer, but it will not actually execute the code. It'll execute the code when you use the subscribe command. And the way the subscribe command works is once you call it, there are three sort of callbacks. The callback idea is it goes out and essentially this thing kind of goes asleep until this function gets called. So some of these calls are not, they're asynchronous in that way. So what will happen is that will be sent, and we'll look at the code on the server side that intercepts this all recipes call. If we get an error, we'll hit this code in here, and if we're successful, with data will come here, and the info will give us the data back that it found. And after that, if it's successful, we get this complete call here. So let's set a breakpoint right here, because who knows if we can get an error or not. And so now I'll just say play. You hit the next, so it successfully went to the host and it brought back information. But if you look at this, this is an empty array. When you see two square brackets, that's an array. There is nothing. We haven't imported the recipes or the inventory yet. So, but we did create the basic index. So it goes out there, says, oh, I can't find anything. I'm going to give you nothing. And then it will call this callback. So if I step over this and then go back in, this will go return to my landing page code. And we pretty much end with that, and we'll proceed. And essentially, if there is no data, I just display nothing. There's nothing there. So that showed you how to actually step through the Angular code. Now let's see how we step through the code on the server. So I'm going to close this off. That basically kills our debugging. And I'm going to kill this process down here. What I have to do in order to debug on the server side, I have to create a new configuration. So I'm going to go into here. It's going to be Node.js. It's going to be launch program. So now I've got a new configuration that will appear on our drop-down menu. And remember, we had to add that we had to add this special call here. But it's C working directories. It's CWD. So after this, and what we want is we want this full directory here. Also, we're launching, by default it says app.js, but actually we call our server server.js. So this is going to be server.js, and it's within the recipes. Again, this is the parent directory, and this would be the now that we've got this, we can set breakpoints on the host side and the server side. Our code for the server is in this directory, and the code, the express code that intercepts getting all of the recipes resides here. And if we look at the route, it's getting a specific one. This is going to intercept. This thing is listening for any requests that have recipes all, and that's what we sent with the HTTP client. So I'm going to set a breakpoint right here. And now we're going to launch it a little bit differently. We're not going to launch the server from the terminal window. We're going to do it through that launcher. So we'll go into here, find the launch program, use this. And now you see the running, instead of being under the terminal window, it's under this debug console window. And so all of our output from the server is going to come here. Now, we're not going to be launching the little website from here. We're going to just do that. We're going to just do that using a regular website. I'm going to put in the address. And voila, we hit the breakpoint just like we did. This is really important because the server-side code is usually a lot hairier. The problems, you're working at a more system level with databases and so forth. And so it's really great to be able to step through this, and this is pure JavaScript code. Now, what this does, it's very similar in some ways. This is, if you remember at the beginning of our code, we set up a client. This is actually the Elasticsearch client. We set up our username and password in here. We got a certificate, and we're reading some of these things off environment system variables. So that gets set up, and then this client gets called down here. The await, when you attach this to what's called an asynchronous function, which means that if you execute the function, it doesn't return right away. If you do a wait, then it sort of awaits until it's done. So in here, this client, I'm doing a search. I want to find all the recipes. This is our index that we defined in Elasticsearch. True is a part of a parameter we need based on this query. And our query object is going to be a JSON structure. In this particular case, it's a sort of a Java script object. And it says, I want to match this identifier. So I passed in, well, I'm take that back here. I'm looking at the wrong one here. So let's go down here. We're using, so the query itself, we're looking at a little broader part of the query. It's actually the body. So we've got the query part here. I want to match all. So I want to bring all the documents down. And you have to specify the number and from 0 to 100. The actual call itself is going to be search. That's the index. We're going to be using source that contains this body. I put this body object in there. And then if everything works out right, I come through this code. If it fails, then I hit this code down here. So let's see what happens. It should be okay. So it was successful, although it didn't get all the records. It didn't return any records because they're not in there. So this gives you the total number of hits, which is 0. What's returned be put into here. And the source coming back down to here. Will be empty, and that's what Angular had seen. So this is debugging on the server side. Now let's say we change. Let's force an error. So let's see this path here. So what I'm going to do is have the same call, but instead of giving a valid password, I'm going to be giving a bogus password. And see, it should hit the error. Come up to the run. I stop the debugging. Now, you usually have to compile if you make changes in the Angular code, in the TypeScript code. When you change code in the server side, you don't really have to do a rebuild. You just have to do a relaunch. So let's have our breakpoint set. Go there. And then I'll just do a refresh, the trigger. Let's hit the breakpoint. And now I've got, make sure I've got the breakpoint set here. I've also got it in the error section. Let's see what happens. So this actually got an error because it's basically not authorized. And if you look at the message above, so what happens is, as we step through this, we should see somewhere something is unauthorized. So let's continue to step through this code. This full error has got a body to it. It's got a meta part, and under there it's got a status code, and 401 is unauthorized. That's a standard HTTP error. In this case, the body is defined. The reason, unable to authenticate. So this is coming from Elasticsearch, from that REST request. The status is 401, which is standard. And then what I do is I send back this reason to the other end. And that's where we saw it. And you see it in the console as well. Unable to authenticate. So let's induce another error that's slightly different. So let's go back to, where is my, put in the correct password this time. But let's corrupt this file itself. So let's go to this file here. At the end, I'm going to just delete off this equal sign. This should make this particular certificate invalid. I'm going to kill the debugging session. And make sure our breakpoints are set right. So we've got the normal path, we'll get the bad path. So I'll run this again. Switch to this guy here, go to the recipe list, switch back, hit the breakpoint, hit the error, and see, well, let's see what the error is this time. As it turns out, there is no, let's see here. The body is undefined. So rather than crashing the server, I just send back and say this is a kind of a catastrophic error, which is 500, kind of a server error. and the name says connection, so it could not connect. So it's a much more serious error, and then I send that back to the front-end client. So that shows how we can debug. And I think I have to wrap this up. We'll put this back. So I'll actually run. And in the next video, we'll go over the code. Well, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to import real data. And I've got that set up and working. So if we go back to our other mode, so let's stop the debugger from here. So instead of launching, if we go back to many windows, if we go back to our terminal here, do Node.js, and instead of this, we'll drop down, we'll switch to the launch Chrome, and then hit this button here. Hit this breakpoint. There's the way to get rid of all these breakpoints is right here. If we hit this button, this removes them. Total number of hits. Now, if we look at a little window here, import recipes, I've created a little message box here and a button for importing recipes and importing the inventory. And we'll step in the next video, we'll go through the code, how that's done. Once that's set up, then we can, these other pages should start to be operational. So until next time, happy computing.